Hello and welcome to What's Your Story? I am the life orchestrator millionaire, Dr. Varun Gandhi. Love and abundance, everybody. I love starting off the show with a little greeting of love and abundance for everyone. Welcome, everyone joining today. And I want to welcome our guest today. Her name is Anvita Jain. And the title of this episode is called Coming Home to Myself. Now, that's a very interesting title because that indicates we're living a double life. We're wearing a mask. We're shielding ourselves, protecting ourselves, or protecting our true selves. We play the role of this mask so well that after a while, we actually forget who we are. And in this whole process, we become someone who we are not. This reminds me of a quote by Charles Cooley, where he says, I am not what I think I am, and I am not what you think I am. I am what I think you think I am. Meaning, in my case, it would be I'm living my life based on my interpretation of what other people think of me. And this has a drastic effect on our mental health. Because I've been in this place. I wasn't myself. I was living this life that was making someone else happy. I was being fake. Mostly because I didn't really know myself. So today, with our guest, we're going to talk about how all of this affects our mental health. So before I introduce our guest, please hit the like button. Please tag a friend who can benefit from this message and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you have a question, please be sure to post it in the comments below and I will make sure to ask Anvita all of your questions. So who is Anvita? Driven by a passion for empowering people, she is a dedicated mental health advocate, an avid storyteller, and a human resources advisor based in Austin, Texas. Her battle against her own mental health challenges has ignited a passion for eradicating the stigma against mental health, one conversation at a time, by sharing her story and pioneering safe spaces for mental health dialogue. Anvita, welcome to the show. I know in our conversations that you've been through a lot over the last several years. So I'm curious to know, what is your story like and where did it start?
Yeah, I mean, truly, I'll tell you, my story started when I was born. I've been. It's funny because I feel like I retroactively think about my story a lot in terms of mental health challenges. Really, where I say my mental health journey began in terms of awareness was when I started having panic attacks in my last final year of undergrad. It was really unusual. I'd never really been claustrophobic. I'd never really experienced those sensations before. And so that was my first, it was very like foreign to me in terms of freaking out. I would have panic attacks on the bus coming back from work. And to me, that was where that was the first indicator that something was really off with me in terms of my mental health. And it took a while for me to figure out what it was. I started with going to the school counselor. That didn't really help, but like at least I was starting to get help. So like just to frame this, I'm typically someone who likes to do things by herself. Like I wore my independence like a badge of honor. Like quite frankly, until then it was like it wasn't just like a silent independence. It was like no, I'm like I can do things by myself and I take care of myself. And that was a point of pride. I feel like I attached my identity really strongly to it. So that was really a huge challenge for me in trying to work, even figure out what was going on with myself because I was trying to do it by myself. But obviously, I don't know everything and I didn't know what was going on. And that was the first time I was like, okay, maybe I need to talk to someone. So on the encouragement of family, I was like, okay, let me at least talk to the school counselor, even if it doesn't like make me figure it out, it'll be a start. And I think that was the first time I was like, I affirmed I was like okay to get help or talk to someone. So that didn't really help. And then I moved on. I graduated. All these life changes started happening. Right? I was going to move to a new city, start a new job. Not be in school. Like that's a lot of change all of a sudden. Even if it's good change, it's still change. And I think that just threw me for a loop more than anything else. And yeah, there was part of me that was happy, but there was a part of me that was really struggling, and I was just exacerbating the mental health struggles I was going through because I wasn't still hadn't formed a source. I still hadn't found a source of help for him. So, and then when I started the new job, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I think the first thing, because even from the start when I got the job, I thought it was like I had tricked them into employing me. Like, oh, I tricked them. Like, I don't know when we found out. Classic imposter syndrome. And when I started, I also got phone. I started this form of phone therapy to try to help, and that really didn't track. It just didn't. I don't know if it was just not being with a counselor in person or what, but it wasn't really helping me, and I kept going downwards. I wasn't engaged at my new job. There was a lot of really high expectations I was placing in myself that were kind of zapping the enjoyment out of it. I didn't feel like I fit in with my colleagues. All of these stuff that just was like snowballing really, and into like having more panic attacks at work. I couldn't even make a whole day. I couldn't even make it a whole day at my desk. Like I physically could. I had to either go to the bathroom or go into my car or somewhere where I could safely experience a panic attack if there is such a thing. And finally, it's like it just kept snowballing to a point where I just didn't. And I think the worst thing for me was like I didn't have an answer. Like what is happening to me? Because I feel like I'm a problem solver. So like if I have at least some basis of knowing, then at least I can do something about it. So I felt really powerless because I didn't know what to do because I didn't even know what was going on. And so finally, I went to a doctor, and I was finally like diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder with associated depression. That to me, honestly, like I think some people might think it's super overwhelming. It's like worse to know, but for me, I wanted to know. I'd been searching for an answer and finally had an answer. So it was like, okay, this is like not something I know how to deal with, but at least I know where to start now. Like at least I have a starting point to where I can figure something out. Um, and that was the kind of the start of getting myself help and also quitting my job. One of the obvious things was that my job was not conducive to recovery. And I started seeing a therapist at that point, and I more or less had my therapist tell me that indirectly that, like, if you stay in this job, like it's working counter to your recovery. So I quit finally after lots of just like pulling teeth with me on other people's parts. I finally quit because I think we have, especially in South Asian culture, there's so much identity and value attached to your accomplishments and your job. And, I thought I'd fought for, like, I thought I'd barely gotten the job. So I didn't want to, like, there's part of me that didn't want to, like, go. It was like, I'm not going to get a job like that again. There's part of me that was, like, feeling that scarcity. And so, but, I quit and it helped. And then I got therapy. Sorry, go ahead. Looks
Now, I
like
was going to say, like, at that moment when you were quitting your job, what were the people around you kind of telling you? Were they supportive or were they against the idea of quitting the
I
job?
got mixed. I would say I get mixed advice, and I think that's the other thing that made it hard, right? And it was all well intentioned, but some people close to me were like, just stick it out for a year because it might look bad if you quit. I was still under the 6 month mark at that point. Um, my parents were very much. They'd been telling me to quit for like 2 months at that point. They'd been telling me to quit since before I even got diagnosed. And my parents are the people I think know the best in a lot of situations because they just know me really well.
That's
Um,
really cool. It's really cool that they were supportive of that because I know
yeah,
a lot of parents, especially because you mentioned that, right? In the Indian community, we value our career a lot. We value that status a lot and
absolutely.
accomplishments, right? So
Yeah,
your parents actually being supportive of you and wanting you to leave your job because your health is more important. That's very unique in our community and a lot of communities that I've seen.
yeah. I would say the way they even supported me even after that is very pleasantly surprising. Not that, I was expecting them to not support me, but the fact that that didn't have to fight that uphill battle was really helpful. So once I quit, I started treatment so I spent about 6 months before going back to graduate school, really focusing on my treatment. And it wasn't easy. There was constantly the struggle of like, I want to go find another job or I want to go do something about it. And what I was doing was I was essentially avoiding sitting with the anxiety itself. That's what I was trying to do, is like trying to create noise in my life is the way I put it. But I think the best thing I did for myself is I didn't do that. And I did spend the next 6 months very much just focusing on recovery, and that was it. That's all I did. Besides applying to graduate school. That was like the other little thing. But I would say like most of my time was on recovery. I also made a career switch. So that was the other kind of part of my work, was like really aligning myself with a field that I was passionate in. And that was kind of when I landed on HR and I decided to go back to school for human resources. And that was really the answer. That was a huge answer to improvement in my mental health, because it's very well aligned with my purpose, and I felt like impact and purpose in that career. So then I started graduate school, and that was really how I started to get out of that rock bottom time of my life. Is like, I started graduate school and I had found something that I was passionate about. So that was a huge, jump in mental health. I just, my priority shifted over the 6 months. Like, I started prioritizing health in a way that I had never had before, because I didn't realize I had to. It was above, health became my first priority, above school, above my social, like even relationships, everything. My health was number one. And I had to consistently maintain that. And I kept, obviously there's a learning curve, right? You never really stop dealing with a mental health condition, but essentially, getting, and then I got my current job at Dell, I got an internship, and everything kind of started falling in place, not just good things, but things that were in alignment for me. I found connections that were more authentic, and that was really what I would say was just that ignited the journey to coming home to myself, in the sense that I like, after that, I think the next step was like I got involved in mental health advocacy. And because for me, the thing I noticed when I was starting to recover is like, I know this is common, but I don't see that around me. I don't see that in my friend circle. And like, yeah, my friend circle was in my whole support circle, family included, was super supportive. They were there for me every step of the way. But it's different when you talk to someone who goes through it. There's a level of understanding that you just can't get from people who just haven't gone through it. And that I was like, I need, like, that kind of support wasn't there for me. So I wanted to bring it to other people. And I think the first part is, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, that's like perfect segue into the next question that I had for you. Is the mental health stigma, right? That's in our
Mhm.
community. There's a lot of shaming around it. There's a lot of like thinking that this person is lesser than, or labeling them like they're crazy or they're pagal or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, what kind of advice can you give? How can we encourage people to seek the help, to be comfortable about it, to be comfortable talking about it? What can you share from your experience?
Yeah, so I think for me, that's where the power of storytelling really comes in. Is really, I think when you're an empowered individual, you inspire other people to empower themselves. So I think it starts with you. And I think for me, it started with empowering myself and finding my own strength and overcoming my internalized stigma, right? There's a sense of stigma, especially when you're a child and you receive messages. Like I said, my mental health journey truly started when I was born. I can retroactively be like, these were moments where I experienced anxiety when I was growing up that I didn't know. And a lot of the reinforcement I got then was of being too much or not enough. And you internalize that as a child. It's very, very strongly internalized. And so digging that up and doing that work, whether that was through therapy or just, reflection, journaling, lots of different things that I did to empower myself. It starts with you. And so for me, as I was empowering myself and as I was kind of venturing into, for me, the start was sharing my story. That was in conversations with close friends, that was on social media, right? Social media, I think, is a very powerful tool to be able to share your story. And I used it. I used it, even just small things, or like small moments of anxiety that I would have. My mission was to keep it real on social media, in terms of like, yes, I would share like the pretty like food and like places I was going, but also I'm talking about my struggles at the same time, so that people can see that like level of authenticity. That being said, that doesn't mean bearing my soul, right? You can create boundaries and still be authentic. I don't think the two are inclusive, but basically, as I empowered myself, then you can start, like I said, creating spaces for dialogue, right? So I started working. I started being involved in a mental health nonprofit called Manmukti, and for me, that was kind of the start of me actually helping other people and getting to other people, was through partnerships and sharing content on different things on their social media, different platforms, writing articles about it, really just talking about it. Dialogue is really the start of everything, I think, is like just having those conversations, whether it's one person, whether it's a forum that you create for discussion, whether it's things like this, just talking about it, because the more it's talked about, the more people are like, oh, like that's okay, right? That it's an affirmation that it's okay for that to be happening. And also like it's frequent. like it kind of gives a more realistic perspective of like I'm not alone. You start building that community around like, yeah, there are people who deal with it, whether they're diagnosed with a mental health condition or not, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm like, if you have a brain, taking care of it is your mental health. So everyone has mental health to take care of and challenges, whether you're diagnosed or not. And that means everyone has a basis to talk about it and everyone should talk about it. It should be something like you take care of your physical health regardless of like your mental health just as important. Everything's kind of integrated, and I think that's where it starts is the dialogue, and then you can start being like, okay, so how do we change culture? How do we change policy, to start making tangible impacts in terms of people getting that help and making it accessible, right? One of the biggest things is just sometimes mental health care is not accessible. I mean, I've been really privileged in terms of what I've had access to myself, financially, being able to pay for it. That in itself is a huge thing. So I think it's just a trickle effect to from dialogue to actually making those changes to make it accessible.
I feel like there are several people right now who could benefit from understanding what Manmukti does. You mentioned Manmukti as an organization that you volunteer
Mhm.
with. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about them, Manmukti, and what they do and how people can reach out to them?
Yeah, sure thing. So, Mukti is a mental health profit or mental health advocacy nonprofit focused on actually the South Asian community. And they exist on several platforms. They have a website, they have a Facebook page community, they have a Instagram page. So you can just like Google Mukti and it'll pop up. And they provide several different things, right? So they're like educational resources on their Instagram platform. There are resources like where you can find care and stuff on their website. There's just basic information on different mental health conditions. So and then there's contact information as well. If you want to get involved or you just need some information. There's a community where you can ask questions or post resources. So there's several kind of different avenues that you can go through, and they provide like they're kind of that bridge in terms of one creating space for dialogues and doing campaigns on specific topics within mental health, but also kind of linking you to the professionals that can really, if you need another level of help, they kind of provide those resources.
Okay, gotcha. That's very interesting. I love that they do that. I love that they exist because a lot of people need that help from Manmukti and other mental health organizations. You mentioned that you were kind of involved in mental health advocacy, and you're, getting more passionately involved in that. So, what ignited that passion for the advocacy?
Um, Really just so I've always found power in my voice through writing. That's just been something that, I was a really shy kid growing up, and for me, I knew I had a strong voice. Like I knew, I had a strong sense of like very strong willed, and like a lot of it was internalized. I think that's how I dealt with a lot of things. And so finding a way to express that took me some time. And my way of finding it was when I joined newspaper through writing. I realized I was a really good writer. And so for me, when I was kind of looking for an avenue to share my story, it was really just writing on Snapchat. And maybe people would read it, I don't know. But that's kind of what started is like, and then I got an affirmation. I think affirmation, I try to seek a lot of validation for myself, but to some degree, one of our needs is that connection and affirmation. And I started finding that as I shared my story, I got a lot of positive affirmation and even just connecting with people and having those conversations. And for me, I was like, okay, so this can track. And so then I was like, but I wanted like an avenue. And I saw, that's when I stumbled upon Manmukti, learned more about it, and they actually had positions open. So I joined the org as a partnerships chair originally, which led to like a 2-year stint. So I'm not a Manmukti anymore, but I did spend about 2 years being involved with the organization. That's really what ignited is like as when I had more of a platform and more of a team to work with. That's kind of it kept snowballing, and from there I've done various other things that I can thank Manmukti for giving me that exposure, and I continue my journey in different ways. But that's kind of what started the passion for mental health advocacy.
That's awesome. That's super interesting. You know what? In your bio, you kind of mentioned that there's a key to wellness. What is that? The key to wellness?
in my bio. Actually, I was like looking back at it. It was like, what did I say? I think balance. That's I think what I was talking about is the balance. And for me, that balance can change throughout life. And I almost hesitate to use the word balance. I think a better word is integration. It's integrating the different parts of your life in a healthy way that's conducive to your soul's purpose and your in needs at that point in your life. And that can shift, right? That can shift with major things like whatever job you're starting, whether you're starting a family. Like, there might be times where you want to spend more time at work, for example. There might be times where you want to spend more time at home in your life, and being open to that change, right? It's not a static thing, right? Balance isn't just a one thing, and that's why I call it integration, because it's like how you kind of combine. It can look different day to day, right? There are going to be days where you just need to take care of yourself more. There are going to be days where you want to be out and about more. So that, I think, is the key. And then just being curious, right? That open mind is like being curious to learn more and just be more aware day to day about like what your mental health. And that's where the authenticity comes in, is being open to what's in front of you rather than what you think it should be, including about yourself, which can be a whole other conversation on its own. But I think ultimately it's the integration and just being curious and staying open to learning new things and changes.
So that integration is a really beautiful point. You mentioned it a little bit. You went over it, what it means, but could you dive deeper into like what are we integrating? Like why is there a need for integration? Because that
Yeah.
that indicates that there is like separation in the individual, right? The individual is not whole, but they're different entities, and they have to bring it all together. So can you talk more about that?
For sure. I think what it starts with is mental health in itself is something that you take care of holistically. I think it's really important to have a holistic perspective. It's like there's multiple factors that impact your multiple facets of your life that impact your mental health, right? It's everything from your relationships and your connections to your workplace to your home life, to your hobbies, passions, everything, every facet of your life. And I think that's the biggest thing that I learned is all parts of my life impact. I can't compartmentalize, right? Like my first job is a really good example of what I was trying to do was like, this is a good job. Let me stay in this and also recover at the same time. I couldn't do it because that part wasn't integrating into my life, even though there are other parts of my life that were great. Like my support system, for example, was really strong at that point. I actually had people that I was well aligned with, authentic connections, friends, family, and stuff. But my job was not integrating. So I had to quit. I had to move that out of my life because it's an energy. Everything impacts your mental health. And that's what I'm talking about. Integration is like, I think the other aspect of it is you can't do everything. You can't have that ideal sense of like investing in everything fully, right? Like even at some point, for example, I think work is a good example in our fast-paced society is like where a lot of people do overinvest, even if you're passionate about it. At some point, you hit a ceiling, which is going to start negatively impacting your mental health. So integration is like you still have to make time for those connections, for example. You still have to make time to take care of yourself at home. You still have to make time to take care of yourself physically, right? Work out or eat well, all of these things. And you have to find that combination of how much energy you invest into each part. And that's where I'm talking about integration, right? How does that come together as a whole? And what does that kind of fraction of energy look like for you in each area?
You know that example that you gave at the beginning of this talk about how you had to leave your job because it didn't feel right. I kind of went through something similar. I went through a phase where I worked as a consultant, and it was a year into it. I felt this pain in my stomach, in my solar plexus, and
Yeah.
I would wake up every morning with that pain. And
Mhm.
the question that kept coming to my mind is, why am I still going to this job? Every morning I'd wake up with that question. And for a while, I asked this question to my friends, like people that were close to me, and they gave me a reason. Like, so I kind of like justified it, like, oh, I'm helping the environment, because I was an environmental engineer as a consultant. So I was doing some good in the world. But then I realized at some point that it's not enough for me. Like I wasn't doing enough good in this world, right? With my job, I just felt like I was just wasting my life away. And that led me to being more authentic with myself and actually understanding what that means, because I didn't really know myself at that time. I had to go through this journey of finding what authenticity means for me. So, and I think that's very important, right? So, what inspired you to pursue a life of authenticity?
I mean, I had to be very honest with myself when I started going through recovery. I couldn't really take advantage of the therapy and like that holds you accountable. You know, when you go through the recovery, if you actually want to get better, you really have to be honest with yourself about. I mean, my first job is the biggest example. I had to be honest with myself and quit. That was my first probably move, I would say, towards living a more authentic life, right? Is quitting a job and choosing a field that was not necessarily seen as the most accomplished. And again, I'll go back to this is heightened in South Asian cultures. There's like certain fields as like doctor, lawyer, engineer. And actually the funny thing is that I was an engineering major myself too. And that was one of the fields that I was like, that's not for me. And I'd done a whole degree in it. So I had to be really real with myself that that wasn't what I liked. I had to be real with myself that I was working in finance. That wasn't what I liked either. And I ended up going to human resources, which, yes, allows me to sustain a comfortable life, but it's not the first, like, oh, that's a good career. It was something that I had to choose based on my passion and interest, not because this is going to make me look good or give me status or anything like that. So I think that was the first moment of authenticity. And I realized it was necessary. I realized if I wanted to manage the anxiety that I was dealing with and manage the depression, I had to move towards authenticity. I really didn't have another route or a better route. And I had a lot of help around that, but I think for me, and it's still a work in progress. I mean, I just had like an epiphany almost like 8, 9 months ago during COVID, because COVID-19, I got this diagnosis almost 5 years ago now. And there were so many things I worked through from that point forwards. And then COVID-19 brought up a lot of them back again. 3 years later, I'm like, how am I still dealing with these patterns? I thought I dealt with them. They came back up because it was a whole new situation that we were thrust into. And so I had another epiphany about like, kind of living with that mask and almost not realizing it. And it almost felt like a sense of self abandonment and self betrayal. And I really, again, started a whole other round of moving towards even more authenticity. And I think I'm going to continue to do that in my life. I don't think and it's not a destination, it's an experience. It's something we move towards every day, hopefully. I mean, my intention is just to be more authentic, or not even be more authentic, but just be as authentic as I can in that moment. And I think that's it. There's no kind of sense of like, even like more authenticity. I don't think you really have more authenticity. It's kind of like you're either authentic or you're not. And so that's what I try to do every day. But I think it was necessitated to just recover, and that's really what it inspired me, so to speak.
That's amazing because you kind of took one experience of being authentic and you allowed that snowball into being authentic. I guess at all times, right? Or more often, if you want
Yeah,
to, say it, right? More often.
yeah,
Uh, we've talked about a lot of different techniques for self love throughout this the last 30 minutes. So,
yeah.
what is self love? First, what is self love, and then what do you specifically do to practice self love?
Sure. So self-love is literally like love for yourself. So think about, I think a lot of us can relate to the sensation of love, whether with a romantic partner or with friends or with family, right? So think about having that for yourself. You have a relationship to yourself. That is also a relationship that I think sometimes we forget about, is that and I forget to work on. And just like you have to work on relationships with friends and family, you have to put effort into the relationship with yourself. And building that care for yourself and that genuine supporting yourself and all of that, that is what self love is. That is the practice of self love. How I practice self love. So self love isn't always easy. I feel like social media these days and consumerism and all of that makes self love look like this pretty easy thing to do, and it's not. Deep, authentic self love takes a lot of work, because it's not about just loving. Think about like if someone else, especially in relation to a romantic partner, right? ideally, a lot of us want to be accepted for our entire selves, not just the pretty parts or the parts that are easy to love or the parts that are, good to love. We want to be accepted for the stuff that we struggle with and our weaknesses and our shadow parts, so to speak, right? So self love's the same. It's about accepting yourself in that deep thing. And that involves doing things like inner child work, shadow work, like really getting to know yourself on a really in-depth level. And you have to kind of go through some really hard stuff to do that, and really, again, be honest with yourself about who you are and not just who you want to be in your head. Right? I think sometimes we paint this picture of like how we should show up in the world, and it's not about that. It's about how do you actually show up in the world? What is really your soul saying about who you are? And you have to get past people's perceptions of you. That's part of the journey. And so practicing self love is really a lot of, just for me, it's journaling. It's answering those questions about myself. It's getting to know myself, right? And constantly, I'm always learning something new about myself every day. It's about diving into the parts that shock me, or that sometimes I'm like, oh, am I really like that? Or like just being really curious about how I show up in the world authentically, and letting myself just show up in the moment, right? Being present. Presence is huge in terms of self-love, is like really being in the flow of life, right? When you're just those moments when you just don't know what time's passed, or you're not looking at the clock, or you're just really in the moment and you're just moving through something, and like an hour later you're like, oh, what happened? Like, I just was so into it, I was absorbed, like fully, that full absorption. My way of I seek to live as much of my life in flow every day as possible. And it's not 100%, is not, again, that's perfection and that's counterintuitive. But living my life in flow, anything I can do to foster flow, whether that's walks, for me, walks near water, right? So for me, I'm a manifesting generator. So my sacral chakra is my source of energy. So really, it's like my body leads me rather than my mind. So for me, water is huge. Being near water gives me that energy, right? It ignites my sacral. So for me, walking near water, exercising, working out, again, is another way to get into my body. Writing is huge. Whether that's journaling, I write a lot of poetry. It's my way of processing my emotions and releasing my emotions, and also just being able to respond to things rather than react to things. Another self-love practice is just making time for myself intentionally, right? The way I make time for friends and family, actually scheduling time for myself. Sometimes that means turning down plans, and that means also not working, setting boundaries. That's the other one I want to make sure I touch on, is boundaries. Boundaries are your best friend, and it's one of the hardest things to do. Setting boundaries is not easy, especially when others might not receive the boundaries well. And I've definitely had to work through challenges both with friends and family in terms of setting some difficult boundaries that I needed to do for myself. And I can, spend another half an hour just talk about boundaries alone. But I think that's one of the biggest acts of self-love. I'm really getting to a place where you're like feeling like a whole person. I think that's another thing that our society really sends, like terrible messages in terms of like, oh, you need someone to complete you, and all of that, pardon my language, bullshit. So no, you're a complete person by yourself, and you want to understanding that, again, getting to know yourself is a path to understanding that, and being able to show up in the world as being able to rely on yourself no matter what. That doesn't mean that people don't have needs, or that you don't. We're wired for connection, but at the end of the day, if those connections change day to day, you're fine. You have it in you. You have the wisdom to move through life, and the universe has your back. I'm very spiritual in the sense that I do believe that things are meant to happen for a certain reason, and not everything seems pretty in the moment, but you're being protected from something, things like that. And for me, really tapping into that faith has been huge in terms of self-love.
But there is this higher power that's taking care of you and watching out for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I honestly, and it's funny because we're both Gen, so I think that might be a good point to bring this in, because I actually was raised in a very like non-traditional Gen family in a sense, because I wasn't, my parents, like they educated me about all the like traditions and stuff, but it wasn't forced upon me. It wasn't really like hardcore nailed into me. I didn't grow up near Darasa or like in Jansung, right? I grew up in Portland where there isn't one to my knowledge. So like I grew up a lot outside of that. So what I knew was just for my immediate family. And so it was very, and I'm glad that it wasn't, so strongly forced. It was like, yeah, like we practice it this way, but I had the freedom to think for myself right from the beginning since I was a child. I never really took that in sense, like I never really sought to figure out how much I believed in and to what extent how did I want to practice Jainism? I didn't come into that until my early 20s when I started dealing with mental health struggles. It was a question my dad posed to me is like, because I feel like in college I moved even further away and I kind of rejected it in a sense of like I was an engineering student. So for me, I was like, oh, I'm a woman of science. Like I thought science and religion were disparate things and they couldn't coexist and you couldn't believe in both. And so for me, I basically rejected religion and followed science. I was like, I'm a woman of science. Now, lo and behold, I learned that you can actually, both of them can work in harmony and you can, have beliefs that run both. But like, that took me a while. When I started the mental health journey, like when I first, was coming out of my diagnosis and rock bottom, that was when, I had a conversation with my father about like, well, why don't you like explore it a little more before you just reject it? Instead of reject, you haven't even taken the time to explore. It's one thing to like learn about it and then realize your beliefs were counterintuitive to it. But I hadn't even tried. So I think for me, that was kind of the start of me actually learning about Jainism myself and really figuring out like, what do I believe in? I actually realized that a lot of it is very conducive to things that I naturally value and believe in, which was kind of what started me down the route of spirituality. Now, I will say I wouldn't say I practice Jainism in the very traditional sense, and I don't practice it in a lot of ways that other people do. But for me, a lot of my self-care practices, started kind of harmonizing with Jainism. For example, one of my things is like I recite the Namakar mantra when I go to sleep. It's meditative for me, I meditate on it a lot. So things like that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think we're very similar in that sense. I did grow up in a pathshala. I was close. I grew up in Dubai, and there was a pathshala close by, so I'd go there once a month. But
Mm-hmm.
it was not it was this pathshala where we were taught to memorize the Samayak and memorize the Pratikaman without actually understanding the meaning behind
Mm-hmm.
it, right? And so I didn't really enjoy it. I did it. I know it, but I don't know what it means, right? So
Yeah.
in a sense, I was also kind of rejecting it because I didn't want to go every Sunday or once a month to these things. I didn't really want to be there, but I felt like I was being forced. And so in a way I was rejecting it. So then growing up and going through college, I wasn't really Jane. I mean, yeah, certain things like I was vegetarian. Yeah, basic kind of principle, but I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this and, follow a strict Jain diet and everything. So, but then in a sense, now what we do is just recently we picked up the habit of saying the Navkar mantra before we have dinner or before every meal. So kind of like blessing the food before we did that, before we eat our meal. And we just picked that up from my parents. We were there for about 6 months living in Atlanta with my parents, and they kind of did this. So we're like, hey, let's just adopt it. And now that we're on our own, we still kept it with ourselves because we find that to be really beneficial. Uh, you mentioned a couple of things I want to kind of bring up. One of the things is like you take time for yourself.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Because I don't know if people can actually understand what taking time for themselves means. Like, does that mean watching
Yeah.
TV
Yeah.
alone?
Think about like scheduling. Let's like think about how you schedule your appointments, right? Or you schedule time with friends. Like I'm going to go to dinner with this friend at this time. Taking time for myself means scheduling time to spend with me or alone, so to speak, is that's what it is. It's making that time. It's the same way I plan with other people. Like what I talked about earlier is you have a connection with yourself. You have a relationship with yourself the same way you have relationships with other people. And so think about making time for yourself the same way you make time for them. And that can take, for me, that takes different forms. So that's everything from making sure I, make time for therapy or make time for, take, I have like a morning and evening routine that I make time for, even no matter how much work I have, that kind of stuff. It's small things like that, even.
Even the
Sometimes
journal.
it involve like a weekend by myself, right? And making sure that if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I take care of my needs, even if, friends and family are always going to need you. They're always going to have needs to take care of. That's endless. You have to make time for your needs, right? There's a sense of what I call secure attachment, right? Your needs matter as much as others' needs. And I think that's super important in making time for yourself. And sometimes it's doing the hard stuff. It's like about getting up in the morning and getting myself to the gym. That's part of my, making time for myself.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's those are really good tips. And what role did self-love play in overcoming your mental health challenges?
Yeah, so self-love is it helps you heal. It helps you heal on a molecular level. Like this, going back to like mental health conditions often originate there. They can be a form of nature and nurture, combination of both, but there is a nature element to it where your brain chemistry is what can lead to a lot of these mental health conditions. So for me, I knew that. Like I'd done a scan and everything. I knew there's an element of that. And a lot of the treatment I went through sought to change some of that brain chemistry, but self-love changes your brain chemistry too. Self-love helps you heal on a molecular level, and like flow state is very healing. I don't think a lot of people know this, but it actually heals you on a cellular level. And like this is what I'm talking about, getting into your body, right? It's not just about your mind, it's about giving your cells love. I do this practice in the shower where I say that I love you to every part of my body. Like I literally embrace and say I love, because my cells feel that. The first, I thought it was the most bizarre thing the first day I tried it. I felt so uncomfortable. I'm like, what am I doing? It felt like talking to myself or something. It felt so bizarre. But I noticed the difference. I repeat, I'm going to keep doing this as I do with a lot of things, because there's a lot of discomfort with trying new things. And a lot of mental health recovery is being open-minded and trying new things, even if they feel uncomfortable. And so for me, that level of healing was super important. I forgot the original question.
Now, how was self-love essential in your mental health recovery?
Yeah, so so the self um, changing spurring that healing, that's what leads to the recovery then, right? And a lot of that is experienced. It's not like a goal you set that you're like, I'm going to move X amount towards healing. You just heal through experience.
How do you get into that flow state? You mentioned flow state being very important in healing. What do you
Oh,
use, and are there other methods that people could use?
yeah, flow state is hard. Flow state is hard to get to because it requires faith. A lot of flow state for me is just going involves some uncomfortable things. One of the things, so I go back to what interrupts my flow, right? What is interrupts my flow, and then you have to kind of get rid of that. So like my phone, my phone is one of the biggest culprits for interrupting my flow. The key to flow is focus. So you have to be focused on one thing, which was really counterintuitive because I feel like a lot of people think they have to multitask, and you can't get into flow state if you multitask. There's no way. So a lot of people I feel like there's this hamster wheel that I call the hamster wheel of hustle, and hustle is counter to flow state. So everything that you think you have to do to hustle, undo that to get to flow state. And flow state almost feels slower. It's harder to have faith, like, oh, I'll get things done in flow state. But once you get there, it's actually a lot more productive. It's a higher level of consciousness, everything like that. But think of undoing everything that you do in hustle. No phone, right? Like I set periods. So let me make this more tangible. I set periods of time, like, okay, I'm going to go 2 hours or 3 hours without my phone. And I try to like stick to that. It's a very hard thing to do. Another thing I do is work out. So working out for me is one way to easily get into flow. I'm very focused on whatever like type of exercise I'm doing in the moment. And it's very like easy. There's less resistance. So then knowing that sensation, I can repeat that in my tasks. So like, oh, working out felt good. So if I let myself, and there's also the thing of starting. So I'm like, okay, I'll do this for like literally 2 minutes. So I'll break down like a huge task into 1 2-minute task. Once I start, I just keep going. So things like that. Anything grounding. So like naming things in front of me, right? So let's say like even just something like my laptop. Like let me describe like it's black. It has like a gray base. Things like that. Meditation. So one app that I really like to use is Insight Timer. and it has meditations based on like different things. So like you can meditate on faith, you can meditate on letting go, you can meditate on surrender, you can meditate for intrusive thoughts. There's all sorts of things, and this is why like Insight Timer specifically is like if I have a need in that particular moment, like I want more joy, I'll meditate on that. And that in itself, all of that helps with flow state. They're very so different emotions have different frequencies, and you guys can like look this up because I don't want to go into in detail, but they're high frequency emotions. And I think realizing that you can be intentional, actually create those emotions, that's where the flow comes in. So like I think there's like 5 different things that I try to use: gratitude, joy, love, faith, and I can't remember the 4th one off the top of my head right now, or 5th one. But any of those, and if anything, gratitude for me is the most tangible, because gratitude, I practice it this way. It's like if I find my thoughts veering in the direction of anxiety or intrusive thoughts or fear, I reframe. I stop myself. And again, you have to slow your day down. So that's the other thing, is you can't just keep going. You have to slow down and do this. And I reframe it. I try to think of 3 things that I'm grateful for in that moment, and just reframing to gratitude. And it's not about not acknowledging your fear, right? This isn't like, oh, I don't have fear, I don't have anxiety. You have to acknowledge it because it's not going to go anywhere. So I acknowledge it first, and then I move towards it. It's like, okay, I am fearful, but also what am I grateful for? And then that kind of helps me. And it's not perfect, and I'm not, sometimes I don't feel happy, or I don't feel, but here's the thing about gratitude: you can practice it no matter what emotion you're feeling. You can always be grateful for 3 or whatever things.
Right.
Even if you're sad, even if you're feeling grief, you can be grateful. So gratitude is something that's easy for me to grasp no matter what, and I can always kind of go back to it. So that's what I do.
That's super interesting. I love the gratitude technique because it's that, and then the shower technique. That is the first time I've heard that one, and it is. I could see how it can change our intracellular at the intracellular molecular level. Like you're
Yeah,
literally.
there's that water experiment. I don't know how many people know about it, but you should Google I can't remember what it's called, but if you look up like water love, self-love experiment, I think it'll pop up. But it's basically
Masaru Emoto did this experiment where he froze
where,
water, and
yeah,
he took 3 cups of water, infused it with different emotions, and then froze it and analyzed the crystal structures of each of those waters. And yeah, definitely Google that, the water experiment, Masaru Emoto. A beautiful experiment, and shows the power of words and how they affect our life, everything in our life.
yeah. That's the other thing, actually. If I have a moment, I want to touch on the words, your self-talk, your self-voice, right? One of the things I mentioned earlier was that I found power in my voice through writing. And I think writing, like I said, is another thing that's been central to my self-love practice, is journaling. I think is the best journaling and poetry for me. But your self-talk, and this is where I was talking about even just the gratitude practice, it's reframing your self-talk. So there's another important thing that I do is I set the intention of self-compassion. I used to set the intention of, oh, I need to get stuff done. I need to get as much possible done today. So my day was very productivity driven. And I shifted that to an intention of self-love, because at the end of the day, I'm like, at the end of my life, I can be proud to have lived a life of self-love. So that's what I want to do. It's not going to matter how many tasks I knocked out on my list at the end of the day or at the end of my life. But how much I love myself, that will matter. So but it's an intentional thing. I set the intention every morning to prioritize that, and I found that it shifts how I do things over the day, how I tackle the day and all of that.
I keep telling people who talk about hustle, hustle, hustle that at the end of their life, on their deathbed, they're not going to regret those 3 hours that they didn't work for. They're not going to be like, oh man, those 3 hours on that one day, I should have worked those 3 hours. But
yeah, no, you're not. You're not going to care about that, but you are going to care about how much you loved yourself. And in the moment, it can be very overwhelming. Today's world can be very overwhelming, and there are a lot of things that run very counterintuitive to flow and things like that, and spirituality. And at the end of the day, I'm like, if I'm overwhelmed in a moment, the single thing I ask myself is like, if I love myself right now, what would I do? And that's what I do. Simple as that.
Wow, that is so. Repeat that again.
in the moment, I asked myself, if I love myself, what would I do? And that you can see, the thing is, sometimes it's really hard to get there, right? There's a journey there. And sometimes people might not be in a place where they genuinely love themselves. But I said, still ask, those words are important because it
Mhm.
puts you in the frame of mind and your body will feel it. So for me, a lot of it has been getting into my body. I don't know if people have heard of somatic therapy, but like getting
Mhm.
into the wisdom held by your body. A lot of us just stick to the wisdom up here and we don't get in here. And sometimes your body is a lot better at leading you towards flow and faith. And I find that my body is a lot further on the journey than my brain is. In fact, if anything, my brain's sometimes my enemy in terms of faith. And that's where the stories that anxiety tells me rest. And my body knows different. And that's, my intuition's stronger down here in my body. So getting into your body can, and using those words, self-love, it kind of activates my body. It activates, again, my sacral, really.
Mm.
And
Okay.
it's about letting my sacral chakra and that energy lead over my brain.
Right. And that is a very much needed journey because most of us, especially in the Indian community, are focused on the mind.
Oh,
Where we're just literally just thinking about always in our thoughts, right? And would it be accurate to say that the flow state is a no mind state?
yeah. That's exactly, you detach from your thoughts. You're not in your head. If you're in your head, you can't be completely in flow.
Right.
You're in
And
your body.
they're in your body, right? Correct.
That's
And
why that's why exercising is an amazing way to get into flow state. And it's so easy to get into flow state when you work out because you're in your body. And that's why I like working out so much. It's not even to lose weight or anything like that. For me, it's a way to get into my body and get in touch with my body.
mm, is there a particular form of exercise that you find best at getting into the body?
I use several different forms. So I think for me, it started with dance. One of the things I realized, I got really into social dance when I was in college. And one of the things is as a follow. So typically, women are typically follows when they learn social dancing. The key to being a follow is you don't know what move is coming. You're not planning the moves. You have to read what your partner is going to do in the moment and go with that. And that requires presence. You can't be in your head. You have to sense what their body is doing. You have to get into your body. So for me, so dancing was one of the first forms, and then now it's even just going to the gym and doing, various weight training or Pilates is another one. Yoga. Yoga is actually amazing at helping you get into your body, and it's meditative in certain ways, but that doesn't mean that it's passive. I think a lot of people sometimes think yoga is very passive, and it's like actually very active practice. One of the things I've actually looked into is trauma informed yoga, which can be really good for your mental health. And if you're ready to face your trauma informed yoga, I do not try it lightly because it will bring stuff up, and you're gonna have to face things. But mentally, trauma informed yoga can be huge. Those are a couple forms. Yeah, sports just in general. Just for me, I grew up doing a lot of like sports classes. My dad's really into sports, so for me, just trying different things. I wouldn't call myself athletic, but even just trying different activities has really helped. Yeah.
This has been such an amazing discussion, and I feel like we could go on for another hour, 2 hours, just talking about
Easy.
all of this. We're both vibrating on the same wavelength because I feel this, similar kind of journey. Because even for me, I was really in my mind. I have a PhD in environmental engineering. Engineering is all about just the
Yeah.
thinking, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so I was, for the first 28 years of my life, I was just so focused on the mind that I forgot what it was to feel like in the body. And so since then, it's been my journey of getting into my body. And one of the ways I've realized that it's helped me is after every meal, I tune into my body to understand how that meal is sitting with my body, how my
Makes
body is reacting to that meal. I tune into the meal 1 hour, like immediately after, 1 hour, 1 hour after, 6 hours after, the next morning, because what you eat, you poop out. And if I don't, if it's not in a cycle, then there's something that I'm eating that's not, allowing me to clean out my system. And so
yeah.
that's one of the ways of getting into my body. is I've realized how food affects my body and what food should I focus on, eat more of, and what foods I should avoid. So being a vegan, I find soy, wheat, gluten, all these things
Mhm.
are not good for my body. And so I stay away from them. It doesn't help my digestion. It takes much longer to kind of remove from my system as opposed to fruit,
Right.
vegetables, anything that's raw, natural. So yeah, I mean, everything that you have said so far has been. It just sounds like we're sharing a very similar kind of story, very similar
That's
journey.
awesome.
Yeah, it's just a different experience of it, but I think it's like very synonymous to what we have experienced. So, Anvita, I think thank you so much for all of the advice that you've given our guests, all of the topics that you've talked about. I mean, everything resonated with me and our audience. I feel like there's so much that we can gain from this conversation about mental health and living an authentic life and essentially coming home to yourself.
Yep.
I want to thank everyone that's tuned in today. For tuning in and for being here, for being present in this conversation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to Anvita. Anvita, where can they reach out to you? What's a good contact
Yeah,
person?
so actually, I'm super active on Instagram. So if you want to just message me at Green with Unvi, so Green with like envy, but Unvi, ANVI instead. Um, so that's the handle. So feel free to reach out there.
Wonderful. And I will also post that in the description below. I'll post her Instagram handle so you can reach out to her for any questions. She's an amazing resource for how to live your authentic life, how to come back to yourself, because I know at some point in your life, you're going to go through a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and you're going to want to come down this path of coming home to yourself and living an authentic life. So when you get to that point, feel free to reach out to Anvi, and she is going to be there to help you along your journey. Thank you so much, Amrita. It was a pleasure speaking with you and having this conversation. Uh, any last words?
Likewise, thank you for having me on here. I'm happy to share it. This was a very authentic conversation, just in the theme of authenticity. Just kind of, I had no idea what I was, going to answer anything. So it's been nice to just vibe and be on that kind of same wavelength. And I really appreciate, I've learned a lot from this conversation myself. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel like every time we talk about our lives, we learn more about it. And every time,
Yeah.
uh,
I agree. You have a lot of your revelations as you're kind of talking to other people, and I definitely had revelations in this conversation. So,
yeah. Thank you so much, Anvi, for sharing. Love and abundance, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic evening. You're going to hear from us again very soon. Peace out.